Hello, I'm Jack and this is Entertainment World, and today I'll be talking about Hellboy the Crooked Man, which was directed by Brian Taylor, written by Brian Taylor, Christopher Golden, as well as the original comic book creator himself, Mike Mignola, and stars Jack Kesy in the role as Hellboy. Now, this film is the fourth live-action Hellboy film, as well as the second reboot of the franchise following Hellboy 2019, which was directed by Neil Marshall and starred David Harbour as Hellboy, which itself was a reboot of the franchise following the original two films, Hellboy and Hellboy 2 The Golden Army, which were both directed by Guillermo del Toro and both starred Ron Perlman as Hellboy. So how does this film stand on its own, being not only the fourth film in the franchise, but as I've already said, the second reboot following the financial and critical failure of the 2019 reboot with David Harbour. So, I'll be honest, when I knew this film was in production and I didn't really know much about it. I only knew that Jack Kesy was in the film, and I only know him from Deadpool 2. I'd only previously known him from Deadpool 2, as well as he was in 12 Strong, but I'll be honest, I don't remember him I don't visually remember him in that film. I remember the film, I just didn't remember his face in that film. And so I knew that, and I was on Google one afternoon just reading about other stuff. I can't remember what I was reading about, probably something to do with another film. When I saw a news article on one of something like Screen Rant or comicbook.com or something random, just on my feed, that said the trailer for this film had come out, the first trailer, and it had an image of Jack Kesy as Hellboy with the clicking on the article, and I immediately was put off by the image. I thought it was a really bad one. I don't think it looked good at all, and I then proceeded to go straight to YouTube and watched that first trailer, and I will be honest, I hated the first trailer for this film. And looking at the YouTube comments immediately after watching it, pretty much everybody who watched it also agreed with that sentiment. The comments were either incredibly detailed and highly critical, or were just memeing on the film, and there was very little in the way of positives. I would go so far to say 1 in 20 comments were positive, and even the majority of those were just, it looks okay. I thought the trailer looked poorly made, cheap. I thought Hellboy himself looked poor. I didn't think the makeup that they put on Jack Kesy was good. I thought the hand and horns looked incredibly fake and plastic. I thought the filming of it looked rather poor, and the locations just looked like the woods. And I know obviously the comic is set in the Appalachian Mountains, however it just looked like it was filmed in the woods, as in the woods you would find in your back garden, not anywhere particularly interesting to film in. And watching that trailer, I did just think, why did we get this instead of Hellboy 3? And that's all I could think. Obviously, I know there was other reasons with why Hellboy 3, wasn't made or hasn't yet to be made, or however that goes, because every so often it comes back up as a discussion of, could we still make it? I don't know. I would like to, between Ron Perlman and whoever else. So I don't know if that could happen, and I'm not going to say definitely no, because weirder things have happened, but I'm also not going to go, yes, I believe it's going to happen, because I just really have no idea. It just wouldn't surprise me if it did. So anyway, yeah, that first trailer really did not impress me. And I even made posts, I made memes and stuff about how much I didn't like the look of this film. So, and a lot of other YouTubers and basically media outlets and stuff also didn't like the look of the film. And then eventually though, however long later, I can't remember exactly how long, the second trailer for the film came out. And though it initially didn't sell me on this film, I will admit it was a better trailer, and the overall response to it was actually a lot more positive, with actually the majority of the comments that time around being positive. And some of the YouTubers and media outlets that had previously dumped on the first trailer enjoyed the second trailer. And like I said, I wasn't initially sold on it. I still didn't think it looked very good. I would just say it was a better trailer. However, upon reading watching the fan dub of the comic, because I have started reading Hellboy comics and they are very good, but I wanted to watch the fan dub because I wanted to watch it with my dad, and my dad doesn't read comics, and I thought, well, he really likes the Ron Perlman films. He thought the 2019 version was okay, so he was obviously wanting to see a new Hellboy film just to see what it was like, if it was good, if it was bad. And I thought, well, he doesn't read comics, and I just thought, I'll put this on because he would watch that. And he watched that fan dub version, and it was obviously not only is the fan dub version very good, the comic itself is a very good comic book. Hellboy the Crooked Man, the 3-issue comic series, which I have actually also bought digitally, is a very good limited comic run and a very good sort of short story. And if I was to make a low-budget Hellboy film, if someone said you have to make a low-budget Hellboy film and you have to adapt a storyline to do so, Hellboy the Crooked Man is the one I would do. And in that time, the second trailer had started to grow on me a bit, and upon reading the comic, or like I said, watching that fan dub of it, as well as actually reading other Hellboy comics, it started to warm on me, and eventually I started to actually enjoy watching the second trailer. And instead of not wanting to see the film, I booked tickets to see it last Wednesday. It is now Monday, and although that is a few days between watching the film and the review, I did want some time to think about it, and I was also busy at the weekend. However, I've thought about it, I've got the time to film this, so now I will be saying what my views on this film are. Now, normally when reviewing a film, I like to start off with the negatives, and anyone who has watched any of my previous videos would have seen that's how I, start the video. And then I talk about the positives. But with this one, I wanted to talk about the positives first, and then the negatives, and then sort of like I have things that I have mixed feelings about, where I like certain things about it, but I also feel like the way that they did it was not brilliant with certain things. So it will be slightly out of order to how I normally talk about films. So after watching the second trailer and eventually warming up to it, and reading I'm just going to say reading the comic and thoroughly enjoying that and thinking it was a very good comic by itself, as well as a very good Hellboy comic. So, how does the film stand by itself? Well, if you're thinking what represents the quality of the film better, the first trailer or the second trailer, the good news is it is the second trailer. So, if you hated the first trailer but liked the second trailer, the good news is, obviously, like I said, the second trailer represents the quality of the film better. However, the bad news is, if you also hated the second trailer, you're probably going to hate this film. So that's sort of how I would start off with it. The second trailer was a better representation of the quality of the final product, the finished film. This film is a very close adaptation of that, and for that reason, it obviously has a lot of great material to work off of. And probably the biggest positive for me is this film does nail the vibe of the comic book and the tone. It feels like the comic when you're watching it. The atmosphere, the colour, the locations, and the characters are all very in tune with the comic itself. And it does follow the same storyline fairly closely. So if you like that about the comic, the atmosphere and the characters and basically everything about the comic, there's a lot of that translates to the screen pretty well. And that is probably my biggest positive. I did enjoy the atmosphere of this film. Jack Kessie himself is a good Hellboy. I will admit, I still think the makeup and the effects of his hand and the horn stumps aren't brilliant. They still do look a bit plasticky, especially when up close, or if you stare at them, if that's what you put all your attention on. It isn't the best, and his tail doesn't really do anything. It's just there because Hellboy has a tail. So that still wasn't brilliant, but he himself is a good Hellboy. He is very different from the previous two, because Ron Perlman is still my favourite Hellboy, but he had brought a lot of a sort of a very different energy and vibe to the character. David Harbour's version, even though I think David Harbour was a good casting choice, that film was a bit of a mess, and the character in that film was like a weird sort of impression of Ron Perlman, whilst also trying to be its own thing. However, that own thing was just like a sulking alcoholic who couldn't make up his mind about anything and kept flip-flopping and having temper tantrums, and wasn't a brilliant version of the character. Whereas this version, played by Jack Kessie, is very comic book accurate. He is sort of very dry, quite stoic. He sort of nails the dry wit of the character, as well as the almost bored-like personality. Like, I'm not saying he's boring as the character, but the character of Hellboy is very is often quite disinterested in what's going on, especially in the Crooked Man. He almost seems like his responses are very short. He doesn't really react that much to anything. He just sort of takes it because he's been there, he's done it, or he's been threatened a million times. He's had a million different entities tell him how he's chosen for this evil he was made for this evil purpose, or that they're more powerful than him, or that he's going to get killed by them, they're going to end the world, or he's going to end the world. He's been told that by pretty much every evil entity that he's ever come across. Jack Kessie does nail that aspect of the character. He's been there, he's done it all, he's heard it all, he's had it all done to him, he's done it all to everyone he's ever fought. So he does play that version of the character really well.
You doubt the power of prayer, son? Just in case.
So yeah, I love the almost bored attitude and dry humour of the character of Hellboy in this film. Martin Bassindale plays the Crooked Man. I've never heard of this actor. He doesn't have a Wikipedia page, and I've not IMDb'd him. I don't really know who he is. But as the Crooked Man, he's pretty good. Obviously he's buried under loads of practical effect makeup, which is okay. It wasn't the best thing I've ever seen in the world when it comes to horror practical makeup effects, but at the same time he does bring the vibe of the Crooked Man. I would say he's a lot more creepy in the comic book, especially in the fan dub. Obviously, I know that's a fan dub that isn't anything official, but the way he's voiced in that, as well as how he's written in the comic book, is a lot more sort of sly. He almost sounds like a dodgy con man who, like, bribing sort of sense to him, a bit sleazy, whereas this is just almost straight up creepy. Like, you would never want to listen to anything he has to say. You would never want to take an offer that he gives you for any reason, because he just gives you that vibe of like, okay, you are clearly a psychopath and a monster, and I want absolutely nothing to do with you. So he does give a good horror vibe when he's on screen. Jefferson White plays Tom Farrell, and even though his performance is pretty decent in the film, I would say he was a bit too weak. He comes, you know, you look at Tom Farrell and he comes across like he knows quite a bit. He's experienced a bit. He's obviously everything through his childhood and joining the army and everything he's done since. He's quite confident, and even though his character's introduced as quite confident, I would say he falls apart a lot quicker in this than he does in the comic book, and he doesn't really give the whole sort of cowboy feel that Tom Farrell had in that comic book. But as I said, the actor himself does do a pretty good job playing him in and with like what he was told to do, and I'm guessing how he was told to come across. Maybe he wasn't the best casting choice, but he's not the worst either. I just think he should have been a bit more confident, whereas in this version he isn't really that confident in anything that's going on. He's not a complete coward either, and I just want to make that clear. He's just not what I was really expecting that much from Tom Farrell as a character. Joseph Marcel plays the Reverend Nathaniel Armstrong. I would say he's one of the closest things to the comic. He very much gives the vibe of the Reverend from the comic, and he does a pretty good job, and the actor does come across like the character. So he's one of probably the closest aspects of the film to the comic book. He is very much like the character, and he brings that sense of that character and what the character's personality is like, and the way he talks and how he treats the other characters in the film. That's very accurate. So both in a writing sense and his appearance and how he plays the character is probably one of the most accurate from comic book to screen aspects of this film.
Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. That'll work.
Hannah Margitston plays Cora Fisher. She's okay. Cora Fisher, even though it is an important aspect of the comic, you know, if you've read it, you know what her character is in it, and I would say she has a bit less to do in the film than she did in the comic. I don't really have an awful lot to say about that, her performance, other than she was okay as the character. I would say the best thing about her character in the film was both the snake scene and the raccoon scene, which, if you've read the comic or watched the clips on YouTube, because both those clips have actually been released to promote the film, those are probably the best things that this film does with her character, and the raccoon scene is probably the best, one of the best visual scenes in this film, as well as one of the creepiest moments in both the film and the comic itself. Adeline Rudolph plays Agent Bobby Joe Song. Now, this is an original character that wasn't in the Crooked Man comic or any Hellboy comic. This is a character purely made for the film. She's pretty good in the film, and I like the character. I wouldn't say she was necessary, and I feel like you could have made a Crooked Man film without the character in it. However, she does bring a bit more sort of a human feel to the film, because she plays a rookie agent for the BPRD. That it allows for like the audience to feel more sort of connected to what's going on, as obviously in the comic book, the Crooked Man is very much for an experienced Hellboy reader, because obviously he doesn't really introduce a lot of it. Sorry, it obviously doesn't really explain a lot of the backstories towards anything. And characters like Tom Farrell and everyone else in the film is pretty much like not phased in the same way that a person who's never really seen any of this sort of stuff would be, because they all know who Jeremiah Whitkins, the Crooked Man, is, and they know about his witches, and they know about about some of his abilities. So she was a good addition in that sense. It allows for a more human feel to the film and sort of balances off Hellboy, because I do feel like a comic book accurate version of Hellboy isn't necessarily the best lead in a Hellboy thing, ironically, by himself. Obviously he works, obviously with other people he works well, and I think that's the one thing Ron Perlman did. He brought a lot more energy to it, whereas the comic book accurate, like I said, is very dry, does come across as more sort of like I said, a bored or stoic attitude. He's done, like I said, done it all. So it allows for a more of a connection than if it was just Hellboy or any of the other characters in the film.
Oh, you didn't want me to squash?
No, squashing's good.
However, I will say that the best character in this film, and that, in my opinion, the best performance as well, both just in general and from page to screen, is Leia McNamara, and I am really sorry if I'm butchering that pronunciation. Anyway, her as Effie Cobb. I genuinely believe she is the best bit of this film. She captures the vibe really well. She has that sort of really feminine, flirtatious, yet just absolutely batshit crazy and terrifying personality and attitude that the comic book character does, and she nails the voice. Like, that is exactly how I would think that character would sound, and that is the sort of voice that I would have in my head reading it, and it was the voice that they went for in the fan dub as well. So she, in my opinion, is the best thing about this film. And I do think that the character overall was the most accurate, the most faithful. Her performance was the best, and it was probably my personal favourite aspect of the film as a whole, other than the tone. So the tone and vibe, and then her performance, are probably my favourite two things about the film, followed by Jack Kesey's very sort of comic book accurate, dry performance as Hellboy.
Let's just keep on coming.
It ain't even really begun.
Come on, Snake, let's rattle.
So yeah, the tone and vibe of the film is my favourite thing. I do think that was very good. The visual imagery, the sets, the locations are all fairly accurate to the comic. They're not the best in terms of production value. However, if you're just more happy seeing these places and these characters from the Crooked Man, like if it's one of your favourite comic books, if you're seeing that on the screen, chances are you'll probably be more happy with that than anything that you could say about it negatively. I mean, obviously I don't know, I'm not you, but that's how I felt. I thought, like, yeah, the locations and stuff, all of that, it's pretty good vibe of the comic book and looked visually pleasing in terms of from page to screen. The characters are all fairly decent and represent the comic book versions quite well. And I kind of like Agent Bobby Joe's song as an addition, like a comic book character in the film. And there were some okay action moments and some cool practical effects as well, with the movements of certain characters and the witches and the unnatural way that they walk, and obviously the Crooked Man himself had some cool effects with how he moved. And yeah, I would say that the film had some pretty decent horror practical effects throughout it, and there were bits where the effects throughout were pretty good. Obviously it is a very low budget film. Basically, apparently has a production budget of 20 million. However, apparently someone who worked on the film, obviously I don't know if he was telling the truth or not, but apparently the budget was even lower than that. So I would say that some of the effects are pretty good, especially the practical effects with the movements of certain characters. Now I'm going to get into the negatives of this film, because in all honesty, would I call this a good film? No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't call it a good film. Would I call it an entertaining film? Maybe. I think it depends on how you feel about it, really, and how you feel about Hellboy as a character in the comics, and if you enjoy the comics or not. Like, would I recommend this film to a normal person who doesn't really watch films and just sort of like watches them on a Friday night with a takeaway, or with their partner or their kids or anything like that? Would I recommend the film then? No, I wouldn't. Personally, it wouldn't even come to my mind. But would I, if someone said to me, oh, I like the Crooked Man comic, is the film worth watching? I would say yes, because I think you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it, and that seems to be the general attitude on the internet with reviews and YouTube comments, is that people either think it's one of the worst pieces of dog shit they've ever seen in their life, or it's like everything they've ever wanted from a Hellboy film since, well, they started making them. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of in between either with how people feel towards this film. So personally, I wouldn't call it a good film, but I did enjoy it, and I've certainly had less enjoyment watching films before than watching this film. The negatives, though, yes, it is a very cheap film. It is clearly made on a low budget, and I would say, in my opinion, that is the biggest letdown of the film. Some of this, there's very little CGI in the film. Some of it is okay and like passable. Some of it isn't very good, and quite noticeably not very good. I wouldn't say it is as bad as the Hellboy 2019 film, because even though some of the CGI in that film was actually pretty decent and is like big screen level, other bits of CGI in that film are some of the most bafflingly bad looking things ever. So I wouldn't say it gets to that bad level, because it never uses enough of it to become that apparent. But yeah, the CGI is okay at best and not very good at worst, and quite noticeable. And like I said, the makeup for Hellboy is the worst thing. Like I said, his horns and his hand don't look great. They look a bit cheap, a bit proppish. I would say they look a bit more like someone who's dressed up in a pretty good fan costume as Hellboy, and then I would say, yeah, I would pass that off as Hellboy himself as the character. And like I said, the Crooked Man effects, makeup, are okay, but they are somewhat generic in how they come across. They're sort of like in that, when you want to make something that looks scary but not too realistically scary that it's just gross to look at, if that makes sense. It has that very sort of theatre, films aimed at a younger audience sort of sense of how it looks, opposed to being like a photorealistic, terrifying, decaying corpse that walks in and moves in a horrible fashion. And though, like I said, it does follow the comic book fairly closely, it does sort of deviate in certain places, and certain things are rushed over or not really explained at all. I think, in fact, I'll go so far to say there is one thing that is almost not explained. So if you've not read the comic, you could be confused, and it also makes additions to the story. And there was one thing, without spoiling anything, where I was thinking in the comic, okay, this is going to be quite like a quick wrap up sort of thing, and it just drags it out for a really long time, and I was like surprised that, okay, this is getting a bit much now. I'm getting a bit agitated with how long this is being dragged out, especially as they, like I said, they add a lot to it that didn't really add anything to it, so it just felt a bit pointless. And so that would probably be one of my biggest criticism of the film, is they add in a lot of stuff and drag that out, yet they then gloss over some things that are in the comic book and are really good and are better than what would they added in. You know, I don't mind changes and differences, and I understand that it's an adaptation, not a shot-for-shot remake. However, I just feel like what they completely glossed over, and some of the stuff they added in, with a lot of the budget going towards what they added in, I didn't feel like was necessary, and I'd rather had spent more time and money on the things that they just sort of skimmed over instead. That's me, how I feel about it. And I would say from a directing standpoint, it isn't brilliant. It is quite amateurish in a lot of scenes, and even though the action in some bits is okay and very sort of vibey with the comic book, some of it isn't brilliant, and you can tell that the hand-to-hand fight scene stuff are edited in a way with like quick cuts and different angles to hide the fact that they're not really punching each other or throwing each other across the room or being shoved into wooden beams. And it is quite obvious in quite a few places that, okay, yes, this has been edited in a way to hide the fact that you're not really doing anything stunt-wise. And there also, at some points, feels like there's a lack of sound effects. Like they sort of punch people or throw them, and there doesn't really seem to be a lot of noise to any of it. And in fact, at some points, I actually feel like the sound effects were delayed, because there's a bit like where Hellboy gets pushed over, and the thud seems to come like awkwardly after he lands, and then had he just, you know, fell and there been a noise, it sort of, there seems to be a bit of a delay. That's a bit noticeable in some points as well. Hellboy's gun effect, even though the sound effect's cool, the visual effect does come across very much like you've got a prop gun and you're just adding like a flash, and he's just doing that when he's firing it. There was bits where it looked cool and very dramatic, but there was other bits where it just looked a bit, okay, you're clearly, obviously you don't want to fire guns at people, and obviously there has been a very famous incident with that happening not too long ago, and that's still a big discussion in Hollywood, and I understand obviously safety reasons. However, there are been lots of films where they've convincingly had people shooting at each other and it looking far more convincing than it does in this film. Yeah, I would just say that its biggest flaws are its technical specs. The CGI is a bit iffy. It's okay in some bits and not very good in other places. The practical effects are okay in some bits. Like I said, the way certain characters move, and the witches flying as well, how they did that was impressive. That actually looked really convincing. And the locations and stuff, they're okay, but there are, like I said, the Hellboy's hand, his horns are quite distracting, and other bits are just okay. They're nothing brilliant. They're just average, and you can tell this film is very cheap. The director himself has made some questionable films, but this film is okay. It's just clearly not really brilliantly directed, as I said, with with a lot of the action. And the overall production of this film is what lets it down, because even if you love the comic, and even if you think the way it is, the vibe and tone of it, like me, if you think that's well done, and that's how I feel, it's just the budget is the big letdown. It's clearly more of a direct-to-DVD video sort of production. Like, I live in Wales, I live in the UK, and it did have a cinema release over here. However, some locations, specific locations, weren't showing it, and the ones that were only showing it a couple of times a day. Like, I have a cinema, but it's quite a drive away from me. They were the closest ones showing it. That's a 10-screen cinema, well, a 12-screen cinema, because it has 10 normal screens, it has a 4DX, and it has an IMAX. And even with all of those screens and not a lot else on, it's still only got 2 showings a day towards the evening. So, and the other places I showed were also either 2 or 3, with one of them being in the early afternoon. So it didn't really have a big release over here. And in America, it is direct to VOD. It isn't getting a cinema release in America, which is arguably where it would have made the most money. So it's a bit strange with that, how it gets a cinema release in most other places, but doesn't in the country that it would probably make the most money. But yes, I don't know. Not obviously, I have no say on that, but it is clearly a low budget, more of a streaming sort of film than it is a theatrical production. And I don't mean streaming in a bad way, because obviously streaming services now do put quite a lot of money in a lot of projects, and there are certain big things on various streaming services. However, yeah, this is clearly a sort of more of an early days type streaming service project, sorry. And I don't know. The thing is, though, hating the first trailer, wishing we would have got a Hellboy 3 instead, and I still wish that I would still pick getting a Hellboy 3 with Guillermo del Toro and Ron Perlman. I would still pick that over this. But this film, I would say, is a better. I enjoyed it more than the Hellboy 2019 film, because that film is a mess. It does have a lot of really bad CGI. The character of Hellboy himself isn't that good, and the whole film is just, basically everybody in that film has either disowned it or doesn't want to talk about it or regrets being in it. The director doesn't like it. The Hellboy actor David Harbour doesn't like it. I feel like the only one who has anything positive to say about it is Mila Jovovich, but whatever. I just don't think that film is a good film. I sort of thought it was okay when it first came out, but my last rewatch I was getting bored really quickly, and I was just going on my phone and checking social media whilst it was on. And that was a while ago, and I don't normally do that with a film. I mean, I only do that if it's a film I've watched 50 times before and I'm drunk. However, I was sober and was like, I'm not enjoying this at all. I got about 20 minutes into it and I was like, I just don't want to. I'll sit through it and I'll finish it, but this is probably going to be the last time I'm going to watch this. So I got more enjoyment out of it. It is nowhere near as good as the Ron Perlman Hellboy films in pretty much any way. I would say the only thing it does do is give that sort of horror comic book vibe more. And if that's what you want from a Hellboy film, maybe this is your favourite. Maybe this will be your favourite Hellboy film. However, me personally, I prefer those two films, and I would still rather that continue. However, if that isn't going to be made, and whatever happens with this film has no bearing on that, then would I want a sequel to this film? Would I want this continued? Yeah, there are other little Hellboy comic book series, short one-offs or little mini-series where it could be made like this, and I do think that though the 2019 film had some potential with its casting, I do think this film has more potential as to be like a mini sort of lower budget Hellboy horror franchise than the 2019 Hellboy film had potential for anything in regards to a franchise. So I will give this film that. It isn't my least favourite Hellboy film. It wasn't the absolute disaster that I thought it was going to be based off that first trailer. It is the film that I thought the second trailer was going to be. But as I said, if you still hate that, you're not going to like the film. The biggest criticisms are the budget, and yes, I do think, like I said, the way that things are dragged out and some other things are skimmed over, that did frustrate me, and I think that's probably the thing that was actually agitating me the most when watching it as a criticism. I just took the budget as was, because I knew that even if I loved the film or I hated it, I was going to be going, yes, this film is cheap, yes, it's clearly visually cheap, and yes, one of the biggest criticisms of this film is they did not spend the money on this film. It just, I think what makes it all a bit strange for me is Mike Mignola has been involved with the production of all the Hellboy films, and he is basically one of the biggest reasons Hellboy 3 wasn't made, because he didn't agree with the direction it was heading in, and he didn't want that. Yet he chose Hellboy 2019 and this over that, which I'm not really sure with either of them what their future thought process with either of these things are at all, especially the 2019 film. I see more potential in this, but just because I see more potential doesn't mean I can go, yeah, I can clearly see where they're going to take this in future. Whereas, and I just think it's weird that as the creator of the comic book series, he's chosen these two adaptations over a third Guillermo del Toro film, which, because regardless of how you might feel about those films, because I know quite a few of the Hellboy comic book fans don't like those films, but regardless of how you feel, he is the only person who's had a clear direction for the character, a clear, conclusion, what he wants that beginning, middle and end to be. And he had that, and he was going to do it. And Mike Mignola didn't want it, and that's a big reason why it never happened. And he's also been a big reason why it's sort of never, even though people have shown interest in doing it, a lot of the cast are happy to, or at least have been happy to return. He's the reason why that never really happened, and he's chosen these two things over that, and I don't really get it. I get it sort of more with this, in that this is the sort of comic book brought to life, I guess. But the 2019 version in particular, I really don't get why he would have chosen that over Hellboy 3. I really do not understand what the thought process behind that at all. I can see it from a company, Hollywood sort of standpoint, because of how they just want to milk things, but from the creator of this, the father of Hellboy, I really don't get what his thought process behind those decisions were. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like if you watch this film, you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it, and that seems to be the general consensus, and there isn't really a lot in between. I just think it's okay. I don't think it's the best Hellboy thing ever that some people seem to think it is. I don't think it's the biggest dog shit thing I've ever seen in my life. And I will say, despite what, my criticisms towards it are, the big companies dropped the ball making Hellboy 3. Lionsgate, I think it was Lionsgate, if I'm wrong I'll correct myself, dropped the ball with Hellboy 2019 as a middle company. You know, a lower budget but still fairly reasonable, and they dropped the ball with that film. And now, because the big one said no, the middle guy said no, you've now got a really small independent, well, several of them, film companies working on this film and made this film. And I will say that despite anything I could say about this film, considering there have been so many big budget films, particularly superhero films and TV shows with the biggest companies backing them, that look like absolute dog shit, with their CGI, their green screen, and it all being like some late 90s, early 2000s case of ugly. Actually watching this film with its really low budget and cheap effects, and how it utilises certain things, and how it sort of knows what it is, doesn't reach too far for what its budget can't do, in a way was actually quite refreshing. It was refreshing seeing a new comic book film where you're not rolling your eyes every 10 seconds at how bad everything looks. Like Deadpool and Wolverine was the last new Marvel film I've watched in a while, where I wasn't fed up with how like crap a lot of the green screen looked, and it's thinking, where the hell did that $280 million go, or whatever the hell they put into it. Like, this was actually quite refreshing in the end in that regard, so I will give it that. Everything I can say about it in terms of the negatives, it was refreshing to just see a lower budget film just not look absolutely terrible, whilst these big Hollywood companies are ploughing millions into projects that just look crap in the end, like all the way through, like inexcusably bad. So I will give it that. I will say that it isn't the worst film I've watched this year. It isn't the worst looking film in the long run. It's definitely the cheapest looking film I've seen in a long time, but it isn't the worst. It has that sort of Blair Witch, Texas Chainsaw thing going on, where the whole thing just feels, it uses the low budget as almost a vibe. However, I don't think it does it as well as those films do, because, as I say, there are criticisms towards its budget, whereas you can't really criticise those other two films with how they utilised it, whereas in this there are some comments that could be made. So yeah, I don't know really what else to say. It isn't my least favourite Hellboy film. It is on the bottom end though. Obviously Hellboy 1 and 2 still the best two. Still want Hellboy 3. But could I have a sequel to this? Yes. Would I watch it? Yeah. Would I like it? I don't know, because obviously I have no idea. But it wasn't the worst Hellboy film, and there was more potential for like a film series or a television series or something with this adaptation of it than there was with the previous adaptation of the source material. So yeah, that's my review. As a film score, I can't really give it a high score. I guess I would give it something like a 6.5 out of 10, because anything below 5 for me is where it gets like really bad, like failing on not everything level. In fact, at that point he's giving it a score because it exists. So yeah, I'd give it a 6.5 out of 10. Entertainment value, this is hard for me, as I'm going to purely give this based off a Hellboy fan looking at a comic book brought to life. I'll give it a 7.5 out of 10. And like I said, that's purely looking at it from a, I like the comic, and the comic is a brilliant comic. So as I said, regardless of anything else, they had a great blueprint to build this off of. Could it have been a better film? Yes. A bigger budget, better direction, just on it from pretty much everything level. Could this film been better? Yes. Was it the dumpster fire I thought it was? Because I do think a Hellboy, the Crooked Man film with a big budget would be a really, really good comic book film. But it's also, in a lot of ways, because of what that comic book is and the characters in it and the lack of like big sets and big action pieces and all of that, it is also arguably the comic book that you would have gone for if you were, had to make a Hellboy film with a low budget. So I can't really blame them for choosing this comic book for that purpose, for making a low budget Hellboy film. I will say, if you were to ask me to sum up how this film feels, I feel like it feels like a very expensive fan film, which did have like a backing from a really rich person. That does actually feel like it was made by people who genuinely care about the source material. And that it was made by people who genuinely care about the source material and gave it a lot of like horror, folklore elements, and gave it that sort of Blair Witch type-esque feeling to it, and those sort of like lower budget in the woods type horror films. So that is the best thing I would say about this film. If I was going to give it a compliment, I could, from a, like I say, a Hollywood production level, criticise it quite a lot. But if I want to look at it from a positive view, which in a way I do, that's how I'll word it. It is a very low budget, independent film, but at the same time, it does feel like it was made by fans who had a reasonable backer to make this project, other than just like 20 quid. So I will give it that, and it does feel like it was made by people who like the comic book, who like Hellboy as a character, and who want to make more of these. It does feel like there was passion put into it at the very least. So in terms of a positive, that's probably going to be the final thing I'm going to say about it. It is let down by its budget, but like I say, passion went into it, and they gave it a lot of good horror, folklore elements to it, and it is a fairly faithful adaptation of a comic book that is a really good comic book. So yeah. So yeah, could have it been better? Yes. Was it the dumpster fire that I thought it was going to be? No. I got enjoyment out of it. I wasn't expecting initially with that first trailer to get any enjoyment out of it. I felt more positives from watching it, but I did watch it knowing that it was a low budget, gonna be a low budget, cheap looking adaptation of a horror comic that didn't really have a huge amount of action in. And I got what I expected from it. Yeah, the dragging things out annoyed me, and skimming over other stuff, and annoyed me. But it was okay. That's the general consensus. This could have been one of the worst things I've ever seen, and in all honesty, it's not. And like I said, I actually found it somewhat refreshing in comparison to other things which have been made in the last few years, and other upcoming things which I am really not looking forward to. So yeah, that's my review of Hellboy the Crooked Man. Obviously I've taken a huge break from making videos, and I keep saying with all my other videos where I'm like, I'm back now, I'm going to do it more. However, without going into it, I needed that break. I'm glad to have done this. I'm glad to have come back and done this video, and I will be editing it as soon as I've done recording it. So I am happy to be back, and I'm going to continue making videos. And though there are some videos I never got round to making and are really beyond like relevancy now, there's still this couple of them I want to make, even though they're very, very late. Particularly, I want to do a proper in-depth talk about Morbius, believe it or not, if you've not seen any of my previous videos, because I actually have a lot to say about that film. Not in a positive, like it's underrated sort of way, but there's a lot I do want to talk about with it, because I find its production and everything that went on with it more interesting than anything else. So I want to talk about that, and there's other things I want to talk about. So anyway, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please, like the video. I would appreciate that. And let me know what you thought about the film as well. Did you agree with me? Did you disagree with me? But did you disagree with me because you loved it and think I'm being overly critical? Or did you disagree with me because you thought this is shit and how could you have anything good to say about this film? I am genuinely interested, so please comment. Share the video if you enjoyed it. Appreciate that. And please think about subscribing. And also, if you want to check out any of my previous videos, I would also really appreciate that as well. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good day. And if you are going to watch this film, I hope that even if you don't like the film, you have a positive experience watching it with family, friends, or whoever. I hope that the overall experience of at least watching it is a good experience at the very least. So yes, thank you again guys for watching, and hopefully I will see you in my next video when I make that. Thank you again guys for watching. Goodbye.